Inna amrahu kullahu khayrun. That it's all good. Essentially, it is all good for the believer. It's all good for the believer. And if you look at the situation that we're in, it's hard to find the good in the situation. There's a lot of stress people are dealing with. People are dealing with financial situations where they don't know how they're going to pay their bills. People are dealing with evictions. People are dealing with not having basic money to pay utilities. People's jobs are in question. People's businesses that they built for years is under threat. And people are talking about the economic fallout that is going to occur during this COVID crisis and afterwards as well. So they're talking about what's going to happen after the fact and how that can even be more damaging than the disease. And one of the things that's being mentioned is that you're going to get rates of suicide. You're going to get an increased rates of suicide, depression, anxiety. And this isn't actually something that's theoretical because this is something that's already happening. The German, one of the finance ministers in Germany, in Frankfurt, he committed suicide. And according to German officials, it was due to the stress of dealing with this pandemic. So because of the stress of this pandemic, this German official who's involved within the financial sector in the government committed suicide. And they found his body, by the, I believe there's some railroad tracks. Yet, inna amrahu kullahu khayrun. That it's all good. For the believer, it's all good. What if you get the disease? Is it still going to be good? What if you have close people around you that succumb to the disease? Is it still all good? What if, because of this lockdown, it pushes the limits of your self-control, of your patience? Is it still all good? And this stress and this anxiety is a very major component of this isolation, of this lockdown, of this pandemic that we're facing. Now, there was a study that was done that says that 43%, increased risk of dying if you've encountered severe stress or a major stressful event in the past year. And I think 2020 is already being characterized as one of the most, stressful years of anybody's life because it's touching so many lives and so many people. And if we look at the rates, over 1 million people infected, we have well over 50,000 people who have actually died as a result of this pandemic. So the stress, it could just be beginning and it could just be turning up. Yet, how can we say inna amrahu kullahu khayran, that it's all good for the believer? Yunus alayhi salam, when he was thrown into the blackness of the sea, covered in the blackness of the night, and then swallowed by a whale and isolated upon layers of isolation from the rest of the world. So Yunus alayhi salam, he is under, according to the Mufassirin, that he was actually under the tongue of the whale, and he's isolated in this situation and in this state by himself in a life-threatening and very stressful scenario. What does Yunus alayhi salam do in a situation like that? Can he say everything is good for the believer? What is the reaction of Yunus alayhi salam? The commentary on his situation is that he made sujood in a place that nobody else had made sujood before. In that state of isolation, he did an act of worship. He committed himself to an act of worship. He turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where no one else had done that before. And one could say is that because no one had the opportunity to do that before. One could say nobody had the opportunity to make sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the whale, under the sea, in the blackness of the night. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put him in that situation, put him in that opportunity. Because what we would sometimes say is that I'm in this prison, I'm in this situation, I'm in this scenario, I'm under this test, I'm under this trial. But rarely do we say I've been given this opportunity to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rarely do we say I have an opportunity to do something great, perhaps, with this environment or the conditions that I've been placed in. And so Yunus alayhi salam, he makes this dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's in sujood where no one else has made sujood before. And he says, La ilaha illa ant. There is no deity worthy of worship except for Allah. Subhanaka. Glory be to Allah. Glorified is Allah. All glorified be to you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The greatness, he's acknowledging the greatness of Allah. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who has ordained for him to be in that situation. That everything in the heavens and the earth belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That whether it is seen or unseen, does not escape the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inni kuntu min al-dhalimin. Verily, I was amongst the wrongdoers. This is the Prophet of Allah making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his moment of need, in his moment of opportunity. Everything is good for the believer. It is all good for the believer. Ar-Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he says in a hadith that it is strange, wondrous. It's a very wondrous and strange thing, the affair of the believer, because there is good for him in every matter. In every situation, there's good. And this is not the case with anyone except the believer. If he is happy, he is thankful to Allah, and that's good for him. And if he is harmed, he shows patience, and that is good for him. It is all good for the believer. Everything is good for the believer. And you know what's interesting in regards to the study that I mentioned earlier, that if you have a major stressful event in your life, or if you've dealt with a lot of stress in the past year, you have a 43% increased risk of dying. So a 43% increased risk of dying. So there's a lot of diseases associated with stress. There is your immune system is affected by stress. So your immune system is actually impaired when you have to deal with a lot of stress. It affects your immune system. Now, there is one difference, though, that can change everything. There's one key difference. And this is non-Muslim studies. So, subhanAllah, they're spending millions of dollars to figure out the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just go to the creator. There was in that same set of data, when they look at these studies, if you simply have the belief that stress is good for you, I'm going to repeat that again. If you simply have the belief that stress is good for you, you have a 0% increased risk of dying. Inna amrahu kullahu khayran. Everything is good for the believer. We should ponder upon that. We should reflect upon that. We should look at our situation as an opportunity. We should look at our condition as a way of turning to Allah. And we should know that everything is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there is always goodness in all of that.
Do I feel that the New York police are providing enough protection, or do I have to have protection of my own? I looked for protection from Allah.